everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fing Talks, our very own Fing podcast. I'm Nadia.
I'm Dalila.
And you can go on.
And I can go on. So today we're diving into the world of MSPs, which is a space that actually evolved dramatically over the last 2 decades, from break-fix models to proactive monitoring, automation, and cloud-first strategies. MSP are now almost like the backbone of IT for small and medium business around the world.
Yeah, I think that's really to the point. And as the landscape itself gets more complex, with cybersecurity threats, remote work demands, and basically ever-changing tech stacks, MSPs, they need more than just tools, right? They need frameworks, guidance, and I think they really need a solid business mindset.
Which brings us today with the guest, of course. But first, jingle.
Fing Talks. Oh, Fing Talks. Yeah, clap it up. Nadia and Dolly Tech Talk that rocks. Fing Talks.
So, he's one of the most respected voices in the MSP community, an author of more than 20 books, a speaker, a consultant, and the founder of IT Service Provider University. He's helped thousands of MSPs build better businesses, and he's here to share his wisdom with us.
Legendary Karl Palachuk.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. Now, Karl, before we dive into the serious stuff, Dali always asks a traditional question.
Every first guest gets this question at the beginning of the podcast. So here it is. If you could be an animal, which one would you be and why?
I thought about this because I watched your first interview. So I think it would probably be a bee, because they're always working in communities, and I love building communities.
That's a great question.
Wow, you like
Also, I'm a hard
That's all right, great answer.
Yeah, I mean, they answered us like a whale and other animals.
Like
but,
a raven, a
yeah,
fox.
raven, but
so yeah.
It's very interesting and curious. So, go ahead. The first question.
Yeah, so Karl, you've been in this game for decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've actually helped shape the MSP model as we know it today. So can you take us back to the beginning? Like what sparked your journey into IT and managed services? Like what happened?
Well, I think like too many consultants, it was largely because of a bad manager, right? I was like, okay, I have to get out of this. What else can I do? And you're gonna, now that you've let everybody know it's been decades, so that was 1995, and I had been getting companies hooked up to the internet before it was public, and now it was open to the world. And so I thought, well, I can do that. And so it was partly also timing and opportunity. The good news for me is that because I came from corporate IT, I signed contracts and I did standard operating procedures and I had great checklists. And so I didn't know that those were not standard in small business. So I just sort of took it with me.
Oh, that's interesting. So was there a precise moment that you realized, okay, I'm not just running a business, I'm building a framework that others can follow?
Well, so the point where that happened, I was writing up documentation for my own employees. I had just a handful, but I knew I was going to grow. So I put together every form that we used in our business. And I wrote out instructions, why we use this form, what it's for, how to fill it out with examples. And then I realized, wow, this is kind of a resource that people would want. So I put it together as a book and sold it, and it took off. And it literally, I couldn't even believe how much it took off, because it filled a gap that, existed in the community. And a lot of people say, well, everybody does this. I'm like, yeah, they do, but they don't share their forms, And so then I got opportunities to present that and, go around the country and actually into other countries as well and teach people standard operating procedures. And so I didn't make a switch, but I added that to the things I do and then gradually moved into writing other books and doing other things and speaking a lot more.
Wow.
Yeah, I think this is what makes the difference. Like anyone can gather information and know how to do something, but when you actually go out there and share your know-how and share your thoughts about something, that's what, actually sparks a community and also, in your case, transforms you and gets you to the point of being a thought leader and, of someone who actually shaped this environment. So talking about SOPs, right, and documentation, as you mentioned, you've written extensively about this. Yeah. Why do you think that it happens that maybe MSPs overlook this, and what do you think the real impact, I would say, is when they get it right?
Well, when they get it right, everything just works better, right? I mean, at some point, if you think about, like, everybody has a process. You have a way that you document a network. You have a way that you test backups. You have a way that you monitor things. But when you hire a new employee, they might have their way. And so as you want to build your brand as an organization, everybody has to do it the same way. And so you might change your way to do it the way they do it, or they might change to do it the way you do it. But when you get another employee and another and another and another, you need to standardize it, because everybody needs to be able to go from machine to machine, client to client, and know this is how we show up. This is the way we dress. This is the way we talk. These are the tools we use, so forth and so on. And so that consistency within your business helps you to be successful. It's great branding, but it also means that there's consistency over time. And, literally, I tell so many stories about, I can go to a computer that was set up in 2015, 10 years ago, by somebody that worked for me. And I can look at the hard drive and know that my company set up their computer, right? There's things that we do that other people don't do. And, that's a way that we've built our brand, but it also builds consistency across employees and across time. So that saves you a lot of money in the long run.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
I think saving money is important for businesses.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about scaling, right? What are some of the biggest mistakes MSPs make when they're trying to grow?
I think the biggest mistake is hiring a technician too soon, followed by hiring a salesperson too soon. I think it's natural because, as Michael Gerber points out, we are technicians. We think of this as a technical business, but it's not. You have to do all the finances and the marketing and the sales and, pay the taxes and follow the laws and all that kind of stuff. And so you can't, when you get overwhelmed, you have to realize you're overwhelmed because you're doing things besides delivering technology. So the tendency is to hire a technician to relieve the obvious pressure for the obvious thing that you think you do. And it's much better to hire an office manager, an administrative assistant, almost anybody who can relieve a lot of that stuff that's not technical and that you end up doing. And, this might be payroll, it might be putting out a newsletter, it could be just filing stuff away and making sure everybody, got an answer to their email, right? There's all kinds of things that you do that are not super high value as an owner, but they have to be done. And so don't hire an engineer and pay him $60,000 or $70,000 a year to filter through your email. Hire somebody who wants to do that for a living and let them do it. And then with sales, I think too many people think, well, if I'm going to grow, I got to sell, which means I got to hire a salesperson. Well, realistically, in small businesses, it makes absolutely no sense to waste time trying to hire a salesperson until you're at least $3 million in top line revenue and you are willing to add $1 million a year in new services to your company. Because if you do the math, that's what it takes to pay a salesperson what they want to join your company. And if you're not willing to do that, or you're not ready because you can't even imagine doing that much extra work, well, you need to, the owner needs to do the sales themselves. And this is violated more than almost anything else that I recommend. And it costs money because you hire somebody and you pay them a ridiculous salary that they couldn't possibly, if you're paying somebody $100,000, they have to sell enough things to profit $100,000 just so you can break even. And then if you want profit on top of that, they have to sell even more. And that's nearly impossible for a company to do when they're super small. So wait, just relax and do the sales yourself, And a lot of small business owners think, well, I'm not good at sales. And like, I don't know, you got like 5 employees and you got, you are making $1 million or you're making $2 million. Like, yeah, you're selling something, right? So don't, downplay how much you can do it.
Yeah. And then, you mentioned like pretty important numbers, definitely for a small business that's, either just starting or is in the game has been in the game for like a little while. And I think when it comes to sales, you really have to think about your customer. You have to understand who your customer is. And, speaking of which, in one of your books, you use this metaphor that I personally loved. You talked about weeding your client garden, right? So can you just tell us a little bit about what it means and why is it so crucial, even for small businesses that maybe are only fixated on hitting those numbers and just selling? Why is it important actually to weed your clientele and your client garden?
Right. Well, most people, especially when they start out, they're trying to get their first 100 or their first 200,000. They take any job they can get. Well, the result is they've got this long client list of people that do not pay them enough money for them to make a living, right? If you think about how many clients does it take at $300 a year for you to take home a profit of $50,000 or $60,000, it's a lot of clients, and there aren't enough hours in the year to make that happen. So again, mathematically, it just doesn't work. So that tendency to pick up every nickel you find, does not serve you well in the long run. So what happens is that, with weeding the client garden, you sort of filter through your clients and you say, okay, who are the ones that are not really my client? Like, they call me when something breaks, but they couldn't care less about me and they might call somebody else next time. Well, draw a line, right? And everybody below that gets a letter that says, hey, we're going to help you find somebody else if you need tech support. So that helps. That frees up some of your time. Then you need to look at the actual clients you have who do call on you and do think of you as the IT person, but they're not willing to move to managed services and they really don't give you much at all. So they're not regular income. And you need to start, again, sending them letters and cutting from the bottom up. This frees up time to do sales and to add a client at the top who is bigger and better and fits more of your model. And it really helps if you have an ideal client worked out beforehand, because then you say, okay, I've got like these 3 clients I completely love. How do I find 3 more just like that? And that's what you want to do, is find those people and put them at the top. And that way you can cut some more and cut some more. And the goal at first is to just have the same amount of clients, but make more and more money as you work them up the ladder. But then eventually you're going to make enough money that you're going to be able to hire somebody, a real technician, because you've already got an admin. And now you can expand the actual business. And I would say every 3 to 5 years, you should weed your client garden, just because that entire process needs to continue for the life of your business.
Makes sense. So
it takes time.
Yeah, exactly. So let's shift gears to network management, right? So why is proactive monitoring such a game changer for MSPs?
Well, for one thing, we need to be able to touch as many machines as possible. And so if we can monitor a whole bunch of stuff, it used to be that we looked at a lot of things like how much free disk space there is once a month. Well, now we can look at it every 30 seconds, right? When we, once a month, we would look and say, oh, who added a machine to this network and what's going on there and what kind of errors am I seeing? Well, that's not very good. I mean, it's better than nothing, but doing it consistently every day, all the time for all of your clients is obviously much better. So just the sheer automation and, being able to look at a single pane of glass and at a glance see, okay, it's mostly green. I got a couple of yellow over here. There's a red one. That's going to get my attention, right? It's also the case, and a lot of people don't think about this. Monitoring allows you to see what's normal so that when something happens, not to pay attention to the stuff that's sort of a normal error.
It gives you a benchmark,
right?
Like it gives you that level of normality that you're looking for.
Yeah, and that becomes more and more important with IoT. When you're looking at an organization that's got 50 cameras, it's like, okay, what does that traffic look like when there's no problems, when everything works perfectly? And again, all of your technicians should know that, so that when something breaks or there's an emergency, they're not seeing that for the first time, right? And so just that regular monitoring helps everything just go a little bit more smoothly. Obviously, you also have, hey, we can keep up on the patches because we know where they're needed.
So do you have a story, like maybe of a client when monitoring actually made the difference, like it actually helped them?
We have a few. One of the funniest is one time we got alerts at a client that the machine at the front office went off, and they kind of had this U-shaped office, right? And then another machine went off, and then another machine went off, and then another machine. They were just disappearing, but not all at once. It wasn't like an electrical outage. And then we got a call from the owner that said, hey, is one of your guys at our office? Because our alarm went off. And I said, no, somebody is stealing your computers. And we literally, they ran down there and they called the cops and they met them down there. And somebody had literally busted in their front door and was cutting the wires and taking their computers. And so we actually were able to alert them on a Saturday. And here's a service story. They then asked us, hey, do you have anybody who could sleep in the office? Because we can't lock that front door until Monday when we get it fixed. And so one of my employees said, hey, you pay me enough and you let me sleep with my dog. So I said, okay, this is not my company, but you guys strike a deal. And so that's how that ended. But we've had times where, one time we got an alert from a client that literally said, this hard drive is going to fail, right? And so we called HP and said, this hard drive is going to fail. Here's what the error is. And then we called the client and said, you've got a hard drive that's going to fail on Joe's desktop. So we're going to come in this afternoon and take care of that. And they were like, how do you know that? I'm like, well, that's what we do for a living, right? And there's that sort of thing all the time. Those kinds of stories exist everywhere. But again, it allows us to patch everything, because if everything's orange or yellow, it means there's a lot of patches missing, and we need to do our job and make sure those things get patched. So monitoring also helps us monitor ourselves that we're doing what we have signed a contract to do.
Interesting. So let's move on to university. So you launched the IT Service Provider University, right? Which is a very cool initiative, by the way. What gap were you trying to fill in the MSP education space?
Well, it's so interesting because the first class I taught, which literally is still available and we teach it, every year or so too, is standard operating procedures. And it's literally 5 weeks of standard operating procedures. And that is always going to be a gap because new people are entering the business all the time. They learn about computers, they learn about technology, they learn how to troubleshoot and find problems or whatever, but they don't learn SOPs. They don't learn the business side of the business. And then we looked around, we said, okay, exactly what you said, what gap can we fill? And so it's like, okay, well, let's help people get to managed services. So we teach a class on managed services in a month. And, eventually we add other classes. We have classes on finances and getting your books straight. We just did one on mergers and acquisitions because that's a really hot topic. And we did it from the perspective of, hey, most of the people who actually take these classes are, they're in the range of 300 to, 900,000. They're not $8 million companies. So, what do they do in this market of, mergers and acquisition frenzy? And so we got an M&A broker to teach that class, and he specializes in IT. So it is a matter of trying to fill gaps. And, we put together a kind of a program where you can take a pathway and say, oh, I want to be certified as a manager in IT, and say, okay, take this class, this class, this class, learn to manage the service board and so forth. And so we help people sort of build a curriculum for their students.
So,
for their employees.
For their employees, yeah, fair enough. I think university students, there was so, I think this is something really important when it comes, again, going back to what you said, having a know-how, having the experience, and then going out there and sharing, with others that you kind of find a need maybe to learn or to hear your own experience. So how important would you say is community and peer learning in this industry? Because I think, also reading a little bit of your articles and also watching other interviews, what I noticed is that some MSPs, they kind of have a little struggle starting on their own. So they're always on the lookout for someone who can actually share their experience. So, is this something that is still actually relevant to have a peer community where you can share these experiences and actually learn?
Yes, I think it's huge, both online and in person, to find a community of people who are kind of going through what you're going through. And, say, how did you solve this problem? What did you do about this? And I founded, along with many, many other people, I founded a local IT user group. Ours was, I think, 2008, but at that time, they were all over the world. And we communicated with each other. So it was like there's this global community. And that was really great because people could help each other at a much bigger level. There are even some cases where somebody had a problem and they started to work on it, and then they called somebody in another time zone to take over, and then they called somebody in another time zone. Tech support sort of went around the world. And those kinds of things are possible when you have a community. It also allows you to call on those people to be your backup. Many, many times I hired my friends from my user group because I'm like, hey, I got a job and I need 3 more technicians because I can't install all these machines at once. But I know I can do it if I had 3 more sets of hands. So I provide a checklist, they provide labor, obviously I pay them, blah, blah, blah. So those kinds of things are possible. But, all the online things and the meetings of, Channel Pro and so forth, those sorts of events help people actually sit down and talk to others and get a sense that these are real human beings with real challenges, and they have families and they have kids and they got personal stuff as well as business stuff as well as technical stuff. And even though we're there for the technical stuff, there's a lot that is involved in owning a small business. I will say some people are resistant to that because they don't want to give away their secret sauce. And I always say, secret sauce is sold in a clear glass jar with a list of ingredients on the back. It's like jelly, and you don't have any secret sauce. The secret sauce is you have to have good processes, good procedures. You got to work hard every day. You have to have good sales. You have to have good follow-up. Nobody is unclear on what you need to do. So don't try to save your secret sauce.
Makes sense. So if you were to start an MSP today, what would you do differently?
Well, the first thing is, especially like today, this is completely possible. It was really tough when I started, but I would only do break-fix work as a way to sell ongoing service contracts. if somebody called me and said, I got a huge problem, I need your help. And I would say, are you going to sign a contract so we will provide you with maintenance for the rest of the year? And if they say no, I would say, okay, well, let me give you the name of somebody else who is willing to take that job. Because again, this is part of weeding the client garden. If I do a $300 job for them, have I really helped my business any, or have I just added enough overhead to break even when that's done? So I would definitely do that. Another thing is, I'd be just generally pickier about clients. Like everybody else, I had to learn the lessons. I picked up nickels I should not have picked up, right? And all of those turned into stories that taught me, don't do that again, don't hire a person like that again, filter for this, right? And I guess in some ways, you have to go through that. But I think the sooner you come up with an ideal client, the better, right? And especially if you can find one client that you really like, where do they hang out? What industry are they in? What do they do? Do they have friends? Because they're going to have friends who are kind of like
they're going to have chat groups. They're going to have forums in which they're going to, to which they're going to subscribe and in which they're going to comment. And I think it's really important to learn how to say no. I mean, money can be very temptive, and it's always nice to get the first bunch of clients when you're starting a business, but then you have to get to that point where maybe it's not just worth it, or maybe it is worth it and you think it's not. So kind of finding that balance between saying no and being greedy, or saying, kind of also being a hoarder of clients. Because many businesses, what I've noticed also when I was going to college, I kind of had this professor that I had like a business professor, and he would tell us about this experience that he had with a small business that he was overseeing. And they would just literally hoard clients to which they couldn't even cater anymore, and that's also an issue, I think.
Well, and what's so odd is, why wouldn't you give your worst clients to your competition, right? Why do you want those people, right? It doesn't make any sense. The other thing that you could do, that I would certainly do, I ended up sort of having a few verticals that I focused on, and I would focus on that sooner, and one of them was nonprofits, larger nonprofit associations. Another was attorneys, right? And we also did a lot of accountants, right? So that allowed me to learn about those professions enough to be able to begin to speak their lingo, and I could actually go to a meeting with some of them, and they wouldn't instantly know that I'm an outsider, right? Because every industry has its own language. And you also learn the patterns, especially like accounting. There are patterns throughout the year when you don't fix anything unless it's really bad, because they have to be head down doing taxes during tax season, right? So you do a lot of work preparing for that. That means those hours are not available to other clients, right? So there's those ebbs and flows for every industry. Agriculture is the same way. So, knowing your vertical helps a lot, because otherwise, if all of your clients are just randomly selected, well, all of their needs are also random, and you have no control over that.
Of course. So we've talked a little bit about the past. We've talked about your, incredible journey from your own business to writing books to creating this incredible community. If we talk about the future, right? What do you think are the trends that could shape the MSP ecosystem in the next 5 years, for example?
Well, the easy answer is AI, but AI and I think regulations are coming fast and furious into our industry at a higher and higher pace. And I think the answer to that obviously is more professionalism. That's why I founded the National Society of IT Service Providers. But I also believe that we as small business consultants need to go back to something we used to do that we got away from, and that is true consulting, truly looking at clients' problems and saying, how can we help you fix something in your business so you're more profitable? Those tend to be really big projects, and they create a client who loves you for life, right? So, but we got away from that, and a lot of sort of the downfall of managed services is that it became a three-tiered price list. Pick one. I sell hammers. Where's your nail, right? And so a lot of technicians can no longer do the consulting that they would have done 10 or 15 years ago. It's not that they're not capable. There's no environment for it. And I think that bringing back that will allow us to stay in business and make good money as the entry level, just patch and fix, becomes another commodity.
Well,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think considering, how the tech world is evolving and in general the tech landscape, we've encountered similar answers with other guests as well. So there is definitely a trend both of regulations and AI and, in general, tech becoming a commodity in some way.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karl, for
Thank you
being
so much.
our guest today. Your insights were not just valuable, but also very, very energizing. We went through a lot of topics, so we really hope that the MSPs that are watching our podcast this episode today are just gonna, come out with brilliant ideas to put into action.
Yeah, I agree with that because, it's rare to get such a kind of clear blend of strategy and experience and also heart in one conversation because, we can tell that this is a project, your lifetime project in which you actually did pour your heart and soul. And I think this is what makes it very special and is going to make this episode very interesting for folks to watch. So we're really, really happy that we had the opportunity to build, to interview you. You've built a legacy that's truly helping others build something and start their businesses. It's really inspiring. So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very kind. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, folks, so that actually wraps up our chat with Karl Palachuk. But before we go, let's zoom out for a second. The MSP space is evolving super, super fast, right? So whether you're a solo techie or you're not a seasoned provider managing dozens of clients, the challenges are real, but there are also a lot of opportunities out there.
Exactly. And I think, Dali, that's why these kind of conversations, they really matter. I mean, again, as we mentioned before, it's not just about the tools or the tech.
Yeah.
It's about your mindset. It's about community. It's about building something that you actually think and know can be sustainable, right? So Karl, he reminded us that documentation isn't boring, it's actually empowering. And, monitoring isn't just something that's reactive, it can actually be preventative. And, I think sometimes the best move is knowing also when to say no.
Exactly. So if you're listening and you're feeling inspired, take that next step. Like read Karl's books, check out ITSPU, join a peer group, or just start documenting on process today. Progress doesn't have to be dramatic, it just has to be consistent.
Exactly. Consistency is key. And as always, we'll be right here besides you. And if you like this episode, share it with a colleague, leave a comment below, if there's something that you want us to cover in the next episodes. And just hit that subscribe button and activate your notifications.
Thanks for tuning in, Fing Talks.
Ciao.